Hi, everybody. Welcome to Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. Standing too close to something? My name is Caroline Brady, and I am the Executive Director of the Friends of Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. Anybody a member? All right, thank you for being members. If you were a member, you would have gotten free parking today. Just one of the many perks. We have some great events coming up, including Sea Scare the last Friday and Saturday of the month. If you've never been, it's really fun. Kids go through the aquarium and we have it all fixed up in Halloween theme. And we also have an opportunity, if you'd like to get involved, to do trunk or treat. So you can decorate your trunk, park out in the north lot, and the kids will come around and get candy from you. So if anybody's interested in that, see Zach over here, or just stop by the welcome booth. Also, we'd love to have you be a member. You can do that in the welcome booth or in our gift shop. If you haven't been to our gift shop, we'd love for you to see it. And I want to recognize Susan McKenna as our former gift shop manager. She kind of set us on the right path. Right. And you met Zach, who is our membership person. So for those of you, everybody knows about Cabrillo Marine Aquarium, right? But just really briefly, let me just say we started in 1935 in the bathhouse when people would come here on the red car. And many people, came from all over the city speaking many languages, and a lot of them had never been to the beach before. So they'd walk up to the lifeguards with something they found on the beach and say, what is this? And the lifeguards would tell them, oh, that's a sea urchin's shell or a sand dollar. And that began the museum. And then in 1981, we moved here. This is a Frank Gehry building. You're all love the art, so this was one of his first major builds, and we're really proud of this place. And Candace Gowan is here. She did a beautiful neon art that we have. And if you come by here at night, you'll see it turned on every night. It switches on automatically. It's beautiful. We love it. And then we have our John Van Hammersveld murals as well. So if you haven't seen them, they're on the back of the marquee and then on the back of the gift shop. So make sure you check those out. We're really proud of those.
It's also lit early morning, I noticed this morning.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sensor. So if it's dark enough in the morning, it'll come on. So anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for loving the arts, and have a great time.
Thank you, Caroline. We're really happy to be back here after being shuttered for so long. I think the last time we did this was 2018. I'm Linda Grimes. I'm the Executive Director of the San Pedro Waterfront Arts District. We're very committed to being a thought leader, and so there's a series of 5 conversations that we're going to have. This is the first one. The second one will be back here at the aquarium on November 6th. You might have seen the slides. And we're going to be presenting a video game composer masterclass with a live ensemble. And Stephen Allen Fox from the Golden State Pop Orchestra is helping us do that. There'll be another one. It'll be an away game in Pasadena at KPCC Family Forum featuring Richard Montoya from Culture Clash. During the pandemic, they filmed Chavez Ravine. I don't know if you know that work. It's about how Dodger Stadium got built and what happened to all those people. And they've curated, they've filmed Chavez Ravine in 9 innings that was shown by Center Theater Group. And they're going to curate those innings and down to about an hour. And he'll be interviewed by John Horn, and that'll be an away game again at KPCC. Then we're back here in April. We have folks from Cornerstone Theater Company who have been working with the Rancho San Pedro people, which, as you may know, is the federal housing on Harbor Boulevard. And they've been collecting their stories, and they've been performing those stories in a play. And then in May, we'll be talking with my friend Judith Teitelman about her book, Guest House for Ganesha. And we'll have a live performance by the Rangoli Dance Company. And then it's time to start all over again. So I thank you for being here. On some of the slides you might have seen, we do the guided art walk tours every first Thursday. And coming up next month on the November 3rd is our 25th anniversary of the art walk. I can't believe that San Pedro's done anything for 25 years, but it's really wonderful to be able to celebrate. I want to shout out to Gustavo Herrera, Arts for LA. Thank you for being here. And I want to introduce introduce my friend Gregorio Luke. Gregorio and I have known each other for a while, and I've always enjoyed the ability to present what he has to say because he's always saying something interesting. And so I had the honor of being invited to his daughter Amara's quinceanera, first quinceanera. Fred and I are the only white people there. We did not party as long as the rest of the group. So you're going to be talking about Pablo Neruda, and I'm going to get off the stage and let you talk. Thank you.
Oh, Linda, I'm very excited to be here. It's always a joy with Linda. She always takes me in unexpected directions. I remember some years ago, she said, well, why don't we do a series on the great new Mexican filmmakers? And that's how we created 3 series on Del Toro, Cuarón, and González Iñárritu. And we did it combining visits to your home in Long Beach and now this. And a few months ago, she was about to embark me in a crazy pursuit. She said, well, why don't we do something about the art that died on 9/11? All the art that disappeared when the Twin Towers fell. And she's got such a power of persuasion that I was on board. I was ready. I mean, that's like a doctoral thesis to get all that and to understand that. It's very important, but it's never been done. But this is the power that Linda has, that she can convince anybody to do anything, anytime, anywhere. And so this is why today I'm here to share my poet. I mean, this is the man that I fell in love with, whose words I used to in my first dates, whose language I made my own, who gave me a sense of social consciousness and political judgments. So,
Well, I'll leave you to it.
Alan. All right. So today, we're speaking of the great Pablo Neruda. Gabriel Garcia Marquez once said that Pablo Neruda was the greatest poet of the 20th century in any language, he said. Neruda has a role in the Spanish language comparable to Hemingway in English. In other words, he simplifies the language. He makes it transparent, easy to understand. He gets rid of all these, elegant complications in the narrative that were so prevalent in the 19th century. And this awareness of the words is also synonymous with the clarity of the messages and a much more sincere approach to life. Instead of this romantic ideal of love that lasts forever, he introduces the doubt about not knowing if you are or not still in love, or the desire of a love that is renewed. So many things that he introduces. He does poems not only to the deep feelings of love, but also to the simplest of things. He does an ode to a sock, or to a soup, or to a fish. And from a historical perspective, Neruda can only be compared with Walt Whitman in the sense that he does a historical poetic diary of Latin America, his famous Canto General, that is a poetical journey that begins with the ancient Inca and Maya heroes coming all the way to the present. He is author of more than 40 books that have been translated to every language. And his work was recognized not only by the great critics and the Nobel Literature Prize, but perhaps the most important recognition is the one of people like me when I was a kid, who chose Neruda to say what we wanted to say to a girl we loved, or to cope with a feeling that Neruda explained to us better than we could ourselves. He comes from the country of Chile, a country that is, as he once said when receiving the Nobel Prize, is the farthest from the established mainstream of civilization. A country that is separated from the world by oceans, mountains, a most difficult geography. And when talking about his unforgettable hero, you know how we talk about when we were young, which was our unforgettable hero. And Neruda would say that his unforgettable hero was the rain of Chile. Rain that doesn't look at all like the rain of the tropics that we have sometimes encountered, that is explosive, happens in an hour, rains vigorously, and then it stops. The rain in Chile can last hours and sometimes even days. It's thick and cold. Neruda would remember how when growing up, they put their little shoes and their socks when they entered the house, and they gave little vapor of heat, like tiny ovens. Such was the coldness of the environment. And Neruda would say that from these muds, from this cold, from this forests, he had go on to sing to the world. His real name is Neftali Ricardo Reyes Basualto. He was born the 12th of July of 1904. And we only know about his mother this photograph. Her name is Rosa Basualto. He was born in July and the mother died in August. So he never got a chance to meet her or talk to her. It is said that she liked to write poetry, but that is all we know of her. His father, José del Carmen Reyes, was a head of a railroad crew. And the job of his father was to put stones over the rails. Everywhere they do that. But in Chile, the winds are so strong that this is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, the trains get taken away by the wind. So he had a crew of ex-convicts and very hard men that broke these big rocks into tiny ones and spread them constantly over the trains. And the father marries again a woman called Trinidad Cándida Marverde, who turned out to be a wonderful woman that Neruda would call his mamadre, like mother, not a double, and who was good and sweet to him, in a strong contrast to the father. The father developed this kind of authoritarian way of governing his men, his crew. And he ended up using the same style with the family. So he used the whistle to get them. And he could turn even the best of times into the worst of times. One day, for example, he took them on a holiday to a place called Puerto Saavedra. And, you know, the ocean is, you know, steep and dangerous, and the kids did not know how to swim. But he forced them to get into the water in terror, you know, so nothing happened to them, but it is a good example of how horrible this man could be. And in the house, one day, Neruda found a chest that was full of love letters to a girl that nobody really knew who she was or who was the author. But Neruda read them and understood that the language in these love letters was very different from everyday language. So it is almost like the first time that he encounters the poetic form of expression. Also in the south of Chile, where he grew up, there are the Mapuche Indians, that as those of the rest of the continent have been exploited and abused for hundreds of years. And the Mapuches hardly knew how to write. So in the stores, they placed icons of what they were selling, whether they were eggs or whatever, they had these images. So that again, the visual image, instead of the word, was also something that encouraged the young Neruda to imagine other uses of the language. That and certainly the woods of Chile. Neruda would say that he who has not been in the woods of Chile doesn't know this planet. It is a vegetation that is unlike any other, with colors that are beautiful and sudden, flowers like the copihues that fall like the drops of blood in the nature. And in the classroom, he meets this beautiful girl, and he starts writing to her. And this is the first time that he is aware of poetry. One of the great things of Neruda is that because his language is so simple, he is relatively easy to translate. It can be enjoyed even by those that are not reading him in his original language. It's so transparent. Notice this poem that I find remarkable. I have never read anything like it, in the sense that he discovers the moment that poetry enters into his life. Just pay attention, because it is absolutely stunning. He says, "And it was at that age poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know where it came from winter or a river. I don't know how or when. No, they were not voices. They were not words nor silence. But from a street I was summoned, from the branches of night, abruptly, from the others, among violent fires or returning alone. There I was, without a face, and it touched me. I did not know what to say. My mouth had no way with names. My eyes were blind, and something started in my soul, fever or forgotten wings. And I made up my own way, deciphering that fire. And I wrote the first faint line, faint without substance, pure nonsense. pure wisdom of someone who knows nothing. And suddenly I saw the heavens unfastened and open, planets palpitating, plantations, shadow perforated, riddled with arrows, fire and flowers, the winding night, the universe. And I, infinitesimal being, drunk with the great starry void, likeness, image of mystery, felt myself a pure part of the abyss. I wheeled with the stars. My heart broke loose on the wind. It's not extraordinary. It's just this moment of the awareness of poetry. And Neruda often traveled with his father in the trains. And these rough men were very gentle to him. And they knew that he loved beautiful things, so they found flowers and insects that they gave him. And he made a collection of these wonderful creatures. He discovered some insects that were so strong that he could stand on top of it without hurting him, as well as bats and all kinds of animals. Throughout his life, Neruda would have a love affair with animals. He always defended them, lived with them, domesticated wild animals with which he lived. And one of the first was a lovely swan, a Chilean swan with a black neck that he found dying in the river. And so he brought the swan home and he fed him little pieces of bread, and he felt that the swan was getting better, and he decided to take him back to the water. But then he walked in trying to liberate the swan, and the swan just cuddled and died in his arms. And he said, I discovered that swans do not sing when they die. So I would say that in his early life, we have, of course, the presence of love poetry, of nature, but then of books. He read voraciously books of adventures and pirates and detectives. And one of his teachers, this is something that it's so surprising that it seems like it's made up, but one of his teachers was the great Gabriela Mistral. Gabriela Mistral also won the Nobel Prize, also a great Chilean poet. And she was a tall indigenous woman that was dignified and beautiful, and taught Neruda to read Russian novels. And Neruda was gaining some notoriety as a poet, but the father detested anything that was artistic. Once he saw a poem of Neruda, and he just told him, "Where did you copy it from?" And Neruda said that was the first time he got a compliment, from his father. And the aggression was such that Neruda decided to use a pen name instead of his real name. And he came up with a Czech author, Jan Neruda. So he put Pablo, and that became his name that he adopted eventually legally. But people were surprised, how come a Czech name in Chile? And he travels, as a teenager, he has access to a horse, and he travels around the vicinity and has these wonderful adventures. Perhaps the most beautiful book of memoirs that I have ever read in my life, and believe me, I've read plenty, is Neruda's memoirs. I recommend them to you. It's so beautiful because even if it's prose, the images are poetic. And he describes, for example, one day where he and a friend arrived to this house where these 3 widows lived that were not widows, but like old maid French ladies that had lived there for 40 years. And when Neruda tells them that he loved French literature, they decide that he is the one they had been waiting for. And so they cook this wonderful dinner for them. Another story that, I don't know, it's one of those things that when I first read it, I was like, 14, 15, and it was just such a shock. He describes how he arrives to a camp of a family called the Hernandez family. And so they do these mountains of hay, and then at night, they all sleep over the hay. They get in there to the hay. And so he's sleeping in the hay, and suddenly he feels a presence coming at him, and he doesn't know if it's a snake, and then he feels a hand, and it's a beautiful woman's hand. And this woman that is probably one of the wife of one of the men has chosen him, and they're making love in the hay. And he's first terrified that he will be surprised, but then the terror turns into enormous pleasure. And then he falls asleep, and the next morning, all he finds is her warm absence. It says, I woke up suddenly because something was coming toward me. A stranger's body was moving through the straw and coming closer to mine. I was afraid. The thing was slowly drawing closer. I could hear the wisps of straw snapping, crushed by the unknown shape that kept moving toward me. My whole body stiffened, waiting. Maybe I ought to get up and yell. I remained stock still. I could hear breathing right next to my head. Suddenly, a hand slid over me, a large, calloused hand, but it was a woman's. It ran over my brow, my eyes, my whole face tenderly. Then an avid mouth clung to mine as I felt a woman's body pressing mine, all the way down to my feet. Little by little, my fear turned into intense pleasure. So I remember reading this and I said, oh my God, it was just such a discovery, such a wonder. In 1921, he travels to Santiago. And again, the father expected him to study something practical, but Neruda studies instead literature. He lives in this house and he's shy. He describes all the shyness, as a sickness, this kind of painful shyness. And in another beautiful chapter, Neruda says how it's very difficult for a normal person to act like a poet. But it is also very difficult for a poet to act like a normal person. And so he describes all these friends that are poets that are just absolutely strange and lovely. One of them, Mr. Bignole, for example, has a cow, a real cow, and he goes around with the cow to the congresses, and he walks with the cow, and he writes odes to the cow. And one day he challenges a wrestler, the Strangler of Calcutta, and he ties the cow to the ring, and of course the Strangler destroys the poor poet. And so then when he writes his poem book of the cow, he dedicates it to the 25,000 assholes that booed at me in the arena. So, he starts publishing in student newspapers like Claridad, and he does his first book called Crepusculario. And he would describe the experience of seeing your first book. Says that moment when the first book appears with its ink fresh and its paper still crisp, that enchanted and ecstatic moment with the sound of wings beating or the first flower opening on the concrete height, that moment comes only once in the poet's lifetime. And at that time, tango was in fashion. And the tango attracted a bunch of lowlifes and gangsters and people like that. And Neruda dressed with capes because his father, as a railroad man, had these capes. That was the only. So he had capes and he gave to his friends. So the idea of these skinny poets with capes absolutely infuriated the gangster tangos guys that once were so angry at Neruda because he was wearing his cape that they thought was like pretentious, that this guy was almost about to kill Neruda. And then he suddenly saw his face and he recognized him from the book. And he says, "But you are Neruda." And he started reciting one of Neruda's poems of Crepusculario. So he was saved by his own poetry. And in another occasion, Neruda went back home, and it was a night full of tempest and stars and fireworks and lightning. And so he wrote this poem that was all inspired by this. But then when his colleagues saw it, they say, "You know what? It looks strangely like the poems of Ergasti, this famous author." And so Neruda went and interviewed him and showed him the work, and he told him, "Is there influence of you in my works?" And Ergasti told him very nicely, "It's a lovely poem, but yes, I do find influence." After that, Neruda always distrusted sudden inspiration. And he went about his poetry working methodically, daily, consistently. That is how he came up with a book that if he would have published nothing else, would have guaranteed his place in the literature of Latin America. It's called The 20 Poems of Love and a Desperate Song. It is based on two women, one from the city and one from the country. And there are many different explanations or guesses at who was this woman. Doesn't really matter. What matters is that this book introduced a whole new way of expressing love in Spanish poetry. Many of these poems are extremely famous. Number 12, number 5. Perhaps the most famous is the poem 20. Let me share with you some fragments of that. It says, "Tonight I can write. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. Write, for example, the night is starry and the stars are blue and shiver in the distance. The night wind revolves in the sky and sings. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. I loved her, and sometimes she loved me too. Through nights like this one, I held her in my arms. I kissed her again and again under the endless sky. She loved me. Sometimes I loved her too. How could one not have loved her great still eyes? Tonight I can write the saddest lines. To think that I do not have her, to feel that I have lost her, to hear the immense night still more immense without her, and the verse falls to the soul like the dew to the pasture. What does it matter that my love could not keep her? The night is starry and she's not with me. This is all. In the distance, someone is singing in the distance. My soul is not satisfied that it has lost her. My sight tries to find her as though to bring her closer. My heart looks for her, and she's not with me. The same night whitening the same trees, we of that time are no longer the same. I no longer love her, that's certain, but how I loved her. My voice tried to find the wind to touch her hearing. Another's, she will be another's as she was before my kisses. Her voice, her bright body, her infinite eyes. I no longer love her, that's certain, but maybe I love her. Love is so short, forgetting is so long, because through nights like this one I held her in my arms. My soul is not satisfied that it has lost her, though this be the last pain that she makes me suffer, and these the last verses that I write for her. You see, it's this moment, do you love somebody, do you not? Love is so short and forgetting is so long. These two early books had gained him some fame, and as was common in Latin America at the time, the poets were sometimes used as diplomats to represent their country. And he gets a position in the Far East. And, he travels, he takes this long travel by boat. So they cross all the Atlantic, they go to Marseille, to Europe, all this. And he's traveling with his friend Alvaro. And at some point, Alvaro discovers this French girl that is like an artist of lovemaking. And he tells Neruda, she's extraordinary. You have to try her. And Neruda does, and he's convinced. And they're about to forget everything and leave everything and not go to their diplomatic post and stay loving this girl for the rest of their lives. So they have to run, not to, she must have been something, can you imagine? So they finally leave to Rangoon, where he arrives in 1927. And it is a period of absolute isolation. He doesn't speak the language, and he refuses to stay within the diplomatic circles. And he looks at all these rituals that he doesn't understand with the goddess Kali that has all these strange, for him, rites. And he's just in this kind of total isolation. And he finds a mongoose. A mongoose are these wild animals that can kill a cobra and can be ferocious. And he calls his mongoose Giria. And Giria sleeps with him and is completely domesticated, though he says that to be sleeping with a wild animal their breathing is different, they're nervous. And one day there's this big cobra that comes to the town. And the neighbors go to Neruda and tell him, Giria has to do her job fighting the cobras. There is this cobra that is terrifying everybody. And they take Giria to see the animal, but Giria immediately runs right back to Neruda's bed. In the East, Neruda wants to experience what it is to try opium. And so he participates in all these ceremonies of smoking opium. And he leaves us some very interesting testimonials about what it feels to try opium. He says, I smoked many pipefuls until I knew there are no dreams, no images. There is no paroxysm. There is a melodious draining of strength, as if an infinitely soft note lingering in the air, a blacking out, a hollow feeling inside oneself, the slightest movement, an elbow, the neck, any far off sound of a carriage, a horn, or a street's cry become part of the oneness, a delicious, sleepy sensation. And in Rangoon, he would meet a woman that is Josie Bliss, that is absolutely beautiful. And during the day, she dresses in Western clothes. But at night, she becomes completely Burmanian. And she is pathologically jealous and in love with this man that she doesn't really understand. And so every time that they make love, she brings this long knife of the Tamiles because she's so jealous that after they make love, she doesn't know if she should kill him or keep him for another night. And so she decides to keep him. And they go on in this relationship that is just so intense. It reminds me of Sherazade. It gets to a point where it's just so scary that when he leaves to Ceylon, he says goodbye to Josie. He says they're both crying. In Ceylon, he connects with the elephants and comes very close to the elephants and discovers how these elephants, once they catch them in the wild, and sometimes they tie them, and as long as they don't eat, they're still free. But the moment they accept feeding by people, they lose their freedom. And in here he would meet another in this place. They had a place where you pooped, and it all fell in this gigantic bucket. And then at 5 in the morning or 6 or so, there was this gorgeous woman that came to take away that bucket of poop. And in those countries, they have what they call a caste society. So you have the Brahmins and all these. And she was a member of the lower caste, the lowest, which are the untouchables. And Neruda falls madly in love with this woman and leaves little flowers on her path. But this woman is an untouchable. She cannot. Finally, she accepts to be with Neruda. And it's this perfect body. But she freezes. When they're together, she becomes like the erotic statues that surround them. But if you read the memoirs, I'm giving you a very limited, it's so rich with stories, with adventures. He goes to Batavia and Singapore, where he would meet Gandhi and Nehru. And he would meet a Dutch woman, Maruka Hagenaar, whom he would marry, and with whom he would have a daughter, the only daughter that unfortunately dies very young. He would return to South America, still very shocked by what he had experienced in Asia. So Neruda always detested those romanticized visions of the East. He had seen a continent that was deeply impoverished and deeply unhappy. And in Argentina, he would reflect in all these experiences and his own shortcomings. And he would do a very powerful poem called Walking Around. This is a book called Residence on Earth. And there's several people that have committed suicide after reading this poem. Let me share with you one of these poems called Walking Around. It says, I happen to be tired of being a man. I happen to enter tailor shops and movie houses, withered, impenetrable, like a felt swan, navigating in the water of sources and ashes. The smell of barber shops make me weep. I want only a respite of stones or wood. I want only not to see establishments or gardens or merchandise or eyeglasses or elevators. I happen to be tired of my feet and my nails and my hair and my shadow. I happen to be tired of being a man. And in Buenos Aires, Neruda would meet the great Spanish poet Federico García Lorca. Federico García Lorca becomes so close to him that they do poems together in which one finishes the stanza of the other. And through this connection, but mainly finally, after all these odd appointments in the Far East, he is appointed by Chile to be consul in Spain. And here in Spain, he would connect with all these writers and authors and poets. Here, his daughter would die, and he would blossom professionally, participating in magazines like Caballo Verde. And he develops also a conception of poetry. I think that Neruda would have loved San Pedro much more than Long Beach or Orange County, because those are kind of newish artificial cities. And look, try to pay attention to this idea of poetry of Neruda. He says, it is good at certain hours of the day and night to look closely at the world of objects at rest, wheels that have crossed long dusty distances with their mineral and vegetable burdens, sacks from the coal bins, barrels and baskets, the used surface of things, the wear that the hands give to things, the air tragic at times, pathetic at others, of such things all lend a curious attractiveness to the reality of the world that should not be underpriced. In other words, the humanized reality. When you come to these restaurants here and you see that sailors have been here, that the tables have been set there, that people have walked there. So in them one sees the confused impurity of the human condition, the massing of things, the use and disuse of substances, footprints and fingerprints, the abiding presence of the human engulfing all artifacts inside and out. Let that be the poetry we search for, worn by the hand's obligations as by acids, steeped in sweat and in smoke, smelling of lilies in urine, spattered diversely by the trades that we live by inside the law or beyond it. A poetry impure as the clothing we wear, or our bodies, soup-stained, soiled with our shameful behavior, our wrinkles and vigils and dreams, observations and prophecies, declarations of loathing and love, idols and beasts, the shocks of encounter, political loyalties, denial and doubts, affirmations and taxes. In other words, what they try so hard in Disneyland to erase, the presence of people, the touch of people that use a wood or a table and sit there, the churches that are been inhabited, in opposite to the plastic artificiality, where there's nothing human about them. You know, everything is brand new and plastic, and it feels cold and distant and dissociated to anything that is organic or real. And he says poetry should be like that. Words should feel like used surfaces, like things that are humanized by our touch, by our sweat, by our passions and loathes and desires. Now, in Spain, there is also a civil war going. In many ways, the Civil War of Spain is the great preamble to World War II. The Republic in Spain has been betrayed by its own army, and the leader of this army, Francisco Franco, has formed an allegiance with Adolf Hitler that has sent his Luftwaffe to try in Spain, as well as Mussolini. So it is a very tragic combat because you have three armies, the German army, the Spanish army, and the Italian army, against the workers. People from all over, teachers. The US, for example, sends the Lincoln Brigade that are artists, writers, people like Ernest Hemingway, like George Orwell, women that learn to use firearms, children. No? If you look at the direction of World War II, it is surprising that they could resist so long. I mean, it took the Nazis a week to conquer France, 4 days to conquer Poland. But the Spanish people resisted more than a year. And in this environment, Neruda has this terrible dream. He dreams of a little sheep that is destroyed by wild pigs. And he sees this as a premonition of what would happen to his friend Garcia Lorca, that was assassinated by the fascists. So in spite of the effort of the Republic, the presence of carpet bombing by the Nazis and the absurd attitude of the Western countries. England is in the appeasement policy. France does not want to get involved. The US doesn't want to mess with Hitler. No? We forget Charlie Chaplin was expelled from the US for criticizing Hitler. There was a strong Nazi movement here in the US. So the Republic is completely destroyed. There are more than 1 million dead people. Neruda returns to Chile because his father had died. So they bury the father, and 3 months later the mother dies. And so when they open the coffin to put the mother's remains, Neruda finds it full of water. The same water of his childhood, the same rain of Chile. He would go back to Spain in 1939 to help move the refugees out of Spain. All these people that were persecuted and put in concentration camps. And through the assistance of Neruda, they board a ship called the Winnipeg and are given asylum in Chile. In Spain, Neruda's poems become overtly political. And when they ask him about this, he would say, "You will ask, why doesn't his poetry speak to us of dreams and leaves, of the great volcanoes of his native land?" And he responds, "Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets." In 1940, Neruda is appointed consul of Chile in Mexico. And in Mexico, a country that is very, very much the opposite of Chile in almost everything. But here he loves the markets and the colors of Mexico, and he forms very close connections with the painters like Diego Rivera and Siqueiros, who would do the covers of his great book, El Canto General. He would also do the funeral oratory for Silvestre Revueltas, Mexico's great composer, and become pretty much an organic part of the country. He, on his way back, he would, in Machu Picchu, write a poem about the people that have been exploited for hundreds of years. It is like the beginning of his Canto General, where he looks at these and he asks, "Look at me from the depths of the earth, tiller of fields, weaver, reticent shepherd, groom of totemic guanacos, mason high on your treacherous scaffolding, iceman of Andean tears, jeweler with crushed fingers, farmer anxious among his seedling, potter wasted among his clay, bring to the cup of this new life your ancient buried sorrows. Show me your blood and your furrow. Say to me, here I was scourged because a gem was dull, or because the earth failed to give up in time its teeth of corn or stone. Point out to me the rock on which you stumbled, the wood they used to crucify your body. Strike the odd flints to kindle ancient lamps. Light up the whips glued to your wounds throughout the centuries, and light the axes gleaming with your blood. I come to speak for your dead mouths." So by now, his commitment to politics is complete. He returns to Chile and he presents his Senate campaign to represent the miners and the workers of Antofagasta and Paracapá. And even though he's a senator, the government pretty much as part of the great McCarthy anti-communist policies in Washington, decides to persecute Neruda. Neruda goes into hiding, and he's in a house locked, in a shore house locked for months. But then they decide that it is unsafe to keep him here, and so they try to get him out of Chile. And to do that, he goes walking through the Andes that are among the steepest mountains on earth. He describes all this crossing of the Andes and how they finally arrive to a cave where they have this huge skull of a bison that has food into it. And so they eat the food and they leave food for the next group. And they participate in this dance. And the place is so high that above they feel very close to the condors flying. He arrives to Argentina, and there is a poet, Miguel Ángel Asturias, that also won the Nobel Prize from Guatemala, that looks a lot like Neruda. So Miguel Ángel Asturias gives Neruda his passport, and with that, Neruda can escape and can travel to France, where he is met by his friend Pablo Picasso. He travels through all Europe. He goes to the former Soviet Union and figures out, does a very interesting comparison of this ice fishing. These fishermen that draw holes and they put a line into the ice and wait patiently to a fish to bite. And the poetry is like that. You know, you do a hole, you put your line, and you spend hours and hours till the fish might bite or not. He's given asylum in Italy, in the island of Capri. And here he has a new lover, Matilde Urrutia, that is kept silent. And from this experience, the great movie Il Postino was done. It is a partially true story about a postman that is in love and finds out that the great Pablo Neruda is there and asks him advice on how to write to the woman he loves. The actor, if you haven't seen the movie, I recommend you see it. If you've seen it, I recommend you see it again. It won all kinds of accolades and Oscars. And the actor that did it had a heart condition. And the doctor said, don't do it. But he wanted so much that he performed it. He loved Neruda. He had gone there. And he did it. Unfortunately, he died a few months after the movie. But he left us his film. With Matilde, he would write her poems like the verses of the Captain that for many years was anonymous. Eventually, he would describe how, people were always criticizing people for their love. He says, poor fellows, he says, what it takes on this planet to make love to each other in peace. Everyone pries under your sheets. Everyone interferes with your loving. They say terrible things about a man and a woman who, after much milling about, all sorts of compunctions, do something unique. They both lie with each other in one bed. I ask myself whether frogs are so furtive or sneeze as they please. So with Matilde, he revisits the places in East Asia where he had been posted as a young diplomat. And he returns to Chile in 1952. After writing the Canto General and all these poems and being like such a hero to so many people, Neruda writes these books of odes. And the simplest of things, like an ode to the bed, he says, we go from one bed to the next in this journey, life's journey. The newborn, the afflicted are dying, the lover and the dreamer alike. They arrived and they will depart by bed. Or the ode to the dog, or the ode to the scissors that he compares with birds flying in the barber shops. He also translates to Spanish Romeo and Juliet, and he does such a beautiful job. The best translation of Shakespeare, I think, is Neruda's, that he becomes a doctor by Oxford, makes him a doctor. Now, if you ever want to be in touch with Neruda, I recommend you go to Chile and visit his homes. He collected the most beautiful things you can imagine. Masts, bottles that have little ships in, the greatest collection of shells in South America. And there's basically 3 houses of Neruda. One is called La Chascona, and you see that the bars, the tables are narrow, meant so that people have to talk. They're right in front of each other, So these narrow tables, the beautiful bars, the collection of everything. Then there is La Sebastiana in Valparaíso that has high windows. And especially, there is a house that is called Isla Negra, Black Island, that was his favorite. It's right next to the ocean, and it has all his love of the sea. He says all these rocks, it's called the Black Island, and the splashes of the shores are there. A place that he inhabited with Matilde, and so many beautiful things. If you go to Neruda's houses, you will come with so many ideas of what you can do with your own homes and what to collect. Neruda would say that he was a poet, but he was born a builder. And these houses that are done with pure ingenuity and intelligence. Some of these like figures, these masts of wood, one of them cries at a certain day every year. You know? And then there's, of course, the ocean that sounds all the time. In Isla Negra, he was visited by authors like Garcia Marquez or Rulfo or Vargas Llosa. And Neruda keeps writing till the end. He writes about flight. He's inspired by the astronauts. This is a photograph that, if I could, I would give Neruda, where you see that tiny dot that is blue is the Earth. He also does books of birds, where he describes the flight of the birds and the different birds, as well as the stones, sculptures. And his passion for animals. At one point, they're going to do a barbecue, and he sees the animal that they're going to kill to cook, and he intervenes and he saves him, and he takes him home, and the animal eats all his gardens, and he keeps him. He comes briefly to the U.S. Penn Club, and then in 1969, there is a chance of the socialists to win in Chile, and so they announce him as a candidate, and his candidacy is gaining steam. So he becomes worried that he might actually be chosen, but fortunately, his friend Salvador Allende is elected. Allende makes him the ambassador of Chile in Paris. And he is absolutely close to this government of popular unity in Chile. In 1971, he receives the highest recognition of literature, the Nobel Prize, in 1971. He did a lovely speech in which he says that his work as a poet involved not only fraternity with the rose and the symmetry and exalted love and endless longing, but also the unrelenting human occupations, which I have incorporated into my poetry. In 1973, the U.S. does everything it can to sabotage Salvador Allende. Everything from promoting boycotts, artificial strikes, Nixon in full gear with a man that I believe is a war criminal, Henry Kissinger, who installed military dictatorships all over Latin America. Neruda denounces him in one of his last efforts. But the coup is underway, and the army of Chile attacks the President Allende's residence. And Allende would die fighting against the military. Neruda would write, "He had to be machine gunned because he would never have resigned from office. That body was buried secretly in an inconspicuous spot. The corpse followed to its grave only by a woman who carried with her the grief of the world. That glorious dead figure was riddled and ripped to pieces by the machine guns of Chile's soldiers who had betrayed Chile once more." And Neruda would die 10 days later. The official version has always been that he died of sadness. However, new theories have emerged which sustain that Neruda was assassinated by the military junta. I strongly believe that is the case. His houses were vandalized right after the coup. And we have to remember that right after the coup, the military in Chile, with the full assistance of the US government, installed a campaign called the Condor Operation that was designed to murder the supporters of Allende anywhere in the world. So blatant are the killers of Chile that thousands were sent into the ocean. Others were buried in mass graves that we still haven't found. But to give you an idea of the nature of the military junta in Chile, in Washington, D.C., the capital of the U.S., the military assassinated the foreign minister of Allende, Letelier. In Argentina, the Chilean military put a bomb and killed General Prats and his wife, another prominent Allende supporter. And none of these people had not even a hint of the power and influence of Neruda. Neruda was granted asylum in Mexico, and before he took the airplane, he was placed in a clinic. And at some point, he sent Matilde, his wife, to Isla Negra to pick up the manuscript of his memoirs that he was writing. So Matilde went, and one of the drivers was caught by the military. It is said that at that time, a doctor came in and injected Neruda in the stomach. We believe it was a substance called Estilococo dorado, a bacteria that cannot be traced. When Matilde returned, she found him completely demerited, and he died a few hours later. I would like to conclude this presentation expanding on the words that Neruda says when he receives the Nobel Prize. He says, "We inherit the painful life of people that have been punished for centuries, people that were suddenly destroyed and muted by the terrible colonialism that still exists. Many authors refuse to share this past of opprobrium and loot. I chose instead the difficult path of a shared responsibility. Only with a burning patience will we conquer the splendid city that will give light, justice, and dignity to all. In this way, poetry will have not sung in vain." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregorio. We have a little reception plan with cookies and lemonade from the corner store, and it'll be outside the gift shop. So we hope that you join us for that, and then you can take pictures with Gregorio in front of the murals, and we look forward to socializing with you over there. So thank you all for coming. It was lovely to see everybody, and hopefully we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Also, if any of you is not in my distribution list and would like to be, you can fill out this card and I will add you to my list of activities as well. Thank you so much.